Okay.
Okay, thank you for coming, and thank you for your willingness to be part of this interview series on best papers. And congratulations, your paper was
Thank you.
one of the 2 best paper award
I know.
this year. And congratulations again. You got another award from HRDQ as well. So you
Yes.
are dominating HRD. So Tom, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Okay. As you said, my name is Thomas Garavan. I've been researching human resource development and learning and development for 30 plus years. I currently jointly edit European Journal of Training and Development. I'm an associate editor for Personnel Review, and I'm on the editorial board of all of the HRD journals, academic journals in the world. I worked for 7 years in Edinburgh Napier Business School as a research professor in leadership, and recently starting in September 2020, I joined University College Cork, the College of Business, the Management and Marketing Group as a professor of leadership practice. So that in a nutshell is my career. And I should say that as of last week, I have published 208 papers.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So I remember reading your analysis of HRD more than 10 years ago. So
I know, yeah.
International HRD, the concept, the field area, has been one of your
yes.
top 5 research topics. So please tell us,
yes.
How has research on international HRD evolved?
Well, in truth, 10 years ago, we didn't really talk about international HRD. We talked a lot about HRD, and HRD with its focus on individual learning and development processes in organizations. That was the primary focus. And then it started to change, primarily perhaps in response to international human resource management, where the focus was looking at HRD in a global context. What does it mean? What are the differences between a traditional HRD model and a global HRD model? And the whole idea of HRD in a cross-cultural, comparative, and international context. So I wrote a review paper, I think it was in 2012, I think, as far as I remember, which tried to delineate some of the dimensions of human resource development as an international global concept, and also to look at the different strands of HRD in that domain. And of course, the strands are comparative HRD, looking at differences in countries in terms of HRD. Then we have cross-cultural HRD, which is firmly located, I suppose, within the Hofstede's cultural model, and looking at how national culture differences shape HRD. And then you have international HRD, which I suppose is a broader concept that looks at the multinational company and the whole role of that organization in the diffusion of L&D practices, HRD practices across the world, and what are the interesting complexities in terms of how they're implemented. So I think it was 2017. In 2017, I edited a scholarly contribution with Professor Anna McCarthy and Dr. Ronan Carberry on international human resource development. And we solicited and got lots of great contributions from all around the world. And as part of that, we had to write an introduction to the collection, which was published by Routledge. And this paper had its origins in that particular introduction, because when we had it finished, we said, what can we do with this? We should get a publication out of it, but where will we go? And naturally, our first protocol was we should publish it and send it to Human Resource Development Review, because that seemed to be an ideal home for it, because that was an area where I had published some previous papers on HRD and international HRD. So we thought it was an opportunity to push the boundaries out and maybe, and perhaps, and of course, to cast the paper in a very different way from what was in the chapter in the book, because the chapter in the book was very much constrained by the book contents, but also we had developed in that a very straightforward systems framework and input processes outcomes framework to try and organize all the concepts around HRD, IHRD. And then we took the opportunity and we rewrote the paper, not very significantly in the first round, and submitted it to HRDR.
So can you tell us the major differences between your original idea of IHRD? You said you published this article in 2012, and then it's been like almost 10 years. What is the uniqueness of this article?
Well, the uniqueness of this article is a very good question. I think what we did in 2012 was more a literature review, which we gathered all of the themes together and looked at what was written on HRD at that time, IHRD or international HRD, and tried to make some sense of it and to pose some search questions within a comparative cross-cultural and international streams of HRD. However, in this paper, we decided, okay, can we find a theoretical lens that we could place down on the literature on HRD and make sense of it and bring a different frame of reference to the topic, so that it might be useful for scholars who would like to research HRD, IHRD in the future. So we basically, after much discussion, we settled on ecosystems. And I think the whole notion of an ecosystem is really a community of institutions, organizations, and individuals. In other words, actors who operate within a particular ecosystem and shape what happens within that ecosystem. So that's, we spent a lot of time, and I have to say we struggled initially to come up with a framework that could be useful in terms of us capturing some of the complexities within the literature, but also trying to make sense of what was a very fragmented and rather diverse and dispersed literature on IHRD, because it was published in a lot of different areas, and a lot of papers talked about IHRD, but when you drill down into the papers, they weren't really about IHRD at all. They were really about traditional human resource development, really. So that's what we were trying to do. And the whole focus of this paper was on actors and how actors organize themselves, how actors interact with each other, and how actors shape what happens in terms of IHRD as an activity or as a set of processes that occur in organizations. And that's where we were coming from with this paper.
Good. So what are the implications for HRD research and practice? What are you suggesting?
Oh, well, I should tell you, just because I know people will be listening to this in terms of thinking of submitting papers to HRDR, we went through, and just to reassure you that we went through a lot of review processes. Our initial paper we submitted, we didn't get very positive feedback, but we did. Many people did see potential in it, so we had to rethink the paper. And it was only actually on rethinking it in the second round that we really settled on the ecosystem perspective. And as a consequence, then it kept evolving, and it took us 4 rounds to get it into HRDR. And I think that's a sign of the quality of the journal and the quality of the reviewers. They gave us lots of challenging feedback, which we had to address. And needless to say, we were so pleased when we got it published. So just message, stick in there. If you get initially poor reviews, stick in there. Reviews are always helpful. Now, in terms of what it might mean for research, I think we need to focus a lot more on the actors, whoever they are, be the multinationals, be the government agencies, be the individual employees. And in our model, we had a multi-level frameworking of actors. We went for macro, meso, and micro level. So we wanted to reflect the fact that there were multiple actors at different levels that operated. And therefore, one of the implications for research is that if you really want to study international HRD, you must take a multi-level approach, or you must at least be cognizant of the fact that it's a multi-level construct, and therefore whatever research you do must try and capture more than one level. Otherwise, you get a very, very incomplete picture of what HRD is about. The second big thing that I think it opens up is the whole issue of power relationships and dynamics between actors. Who are the most influential actors? What influence do they have on what's done, how it's evaluated, etc. And the other thing that's really important is that there is not one ecosystem. There are multiple ecosystems. So if you're in Asia and you're operating, say, in Singapore, the ecosystem there will be very distinct. Say that if you're operating in Ireland as a multinational, that's a completely different ecosystem. Likewise, if you're operating in Europe, it's different, and in the US is different. So therefore, while our model delineated all the potential dimensions of that ecosystem, their character and their influence and their potency will really differ depending on the location that you're studying, or what I call the context in which you're studying.
So can you
That's really important.
Yes,
therefore,
yes. Can you give us
yes.
a couple of example research questions for future investors?
Oh God, do I want to be so prescriptive? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But I'll give you examples of areas that we could investigate. And I think there's a couple of very interesting gaps in the whole research area. First of all, I think there's an emerging interest in how consultants and external individuals to multinationals shape what goes on in organizations. And recently I published a paper in human resource management. It's just come out on talent management. And one of the things that came through in that was how external consultants can shape the types of talent management practice that take place in multinational companies and subsidiaries. And I also think that that applies in the case of international HRD. I also think we also have a lot of lack of knowledge on the role of professional networks and how HRD specialists in different organizations and multinationals in particular, because that was the engine of what we're doing, but it also includes international organizations, how these networks result in different approaches, how there's convergence or divergence in the way organizations in different regions of the world conduct international HRD. I think that's awfully important. And I think we're increasingly beginning to look at how family influences, peer influences, and employees shape the whole IHRD landscape, because an awful lot of the literature is of a top-down nature. It assumes that managers are decision makers in organizations, but increasingly there's an upward influence and there's an emergent process that takes place. So it would be really interesting for researchers to capture that. I mean, one of the big things that I did observe, or we did observe when we wrote the paper, is that there was more written at the macro level, which looks at culture and institutions and government supports, but that the macro and micro levels were actually quite sparse. And that's where we need to look at how those levels of analysis can be opened up and researched to do other interesting things and to find out why practices vary, why approaches to HRD vary or don't vary, and is there convergence or divergence in what's done?
Yeah. However, one thing is missing, right? In this COVID-19 pandemic, how can you explain this unprecedented change or environmental factor?
Well, that's technology, I suppose. Technology and the role of technology. But what exactly had you in mind there?
This is really unpredictable moment in time we are living. In this situation, international HRD must be different. And we have
it is. It has. This is one of the big things that I found, and I've done subsequent research on it. Training and development, L&D professionals, HRD professionals, international HRD professionals have found it very difficult to pivot to make sure that what they're doing is still relevant in the context of COVID. Because I found three interesting things about professionals in this area. They're not very technologically savvy. They don't often get technology. Number two, the classroom is still the great domain in which all learning and development takes place and IHRD takes place. But the reality is that the classroom in its traditional setting has become redundant at the moment. I'm not saying it will continue to be redundant. I think it will come back into force again, but it'll come back in a more blended way with other types of solutions. But the reality then is that the technologies that are used to deliver learning and development aren't as dynamic as they could be, and as a consequence, there are a lot of people who I know from talking to professionals. They would say to you, "Oh, well, the quality of what we deliver isn't great, but likewise, can we use the current technologies to develop the full spectrum of skills that HRD would be focused on developing for an international workforce?" And that's the big challenge. And they are trying to pivot. And I think there's an underinvestment, or was an underinvestment, by L&D professionals in many organizations, be they multinational organizations, international organizations, or others, in good technologies to deliver L&D in these COVID times. So, and the other thing that I've noticed, and it's coming out in research, is there's a lot more self-directed learning activity, and learners are doing their own things because they want to learn, and they have to do it at home and to do it in a very isolated and remote 24/7 fashion. So that's what's happening. So there is a transformation taking place, but the question is, was L&D as a profession or IHRD ready for it? And I don't think they were.
Right. Thank you for being critical about this. I think you use the meta synthesis. Okay, there are many different ways to review the literature.
I know.
We encourage authors and to hear what review method they use, right?
Yes.
So how does it differ from just qualitative review method?
Right. Okay. Well, we weren't right. We were thinking initially, I'll go through the options we considered before we were. First of all, we considered doing a systematic review. But when we started to do the systematic review, we found that there weren't an awful lot of papers within HRD that directly responded to or directly addressed IHRD. So that would limit our sample of HRD, of papers that we could include in a review. So then we looked at a meta-synthesis, because one of the unique and distinct things is about a meta-synthesis is that you can use it to actually synthesize literatures beyond something that the original article was about, or the empirical study. And you can draw from other fields to start looking at things or ideas that came out of that field. And it's very useful to integrate theoretical and what are called qualitative investigations. And when you're trying to develop a conceptual framework, or in our case, a model or some kind of a schematic diagram that sort of captured the complexity of the area. So the great thing about it is that the meta-synthesis allowed us perhaps to trawl the literatures on international management, international HRM, and also to trawl the literatures on cross-cultural management and those areas, and economic or entrepreneurial ecosystems and such like, and draw ideas from those that we could transport and transpose and bring into the IHRD area and see could we make sense of it. So I suppose the big thing in doing it was trying to frame the research question and that was hard. That was hard to do. And in fact, we got a lot of pushback from the reviewers on that. What really was our research question? And our research question ultimately was about trying to make sense of the literature that's there, as fragmented and as diverse as it was, to achieve some understanding about what are the key actors that might exist within this area that we could map onto an ecosystem framework. That's what we were trying to do. So we found, and we could have done a more integrated review, but again, that relies a bit on having a good corpus of literature and a good body of literature. And in this case, there wasn't much within the domain, so we had to borrow from other areas. And that's where I think a meta-synthesis is very, very useful.
Okay. So it's going to be the last question. So what is the key?
Oh, you're doing good. You're doing great.
What is the key success factor of receiving this best paper award? What makes?
Well, what for me, more for my co-authors than me, I think. I mean, I've won a few of these, but this is good. I mean, for me, it told me you're still doing good research. You're still doing things that are relevant. I like to see myself as a bit of a boundary, you know, pushing the boundaries a little bit, coming up with something very different. So that was very important for me. I know from my co-authors that it's very useful for them because they're early mid-career researchers. They're still on their journey. They want to become professors. And indeed, since we published this paper, Alma McCarthy become a professor. And I've no doubt my other co-author will be a professor soon as well. So from that point of view, it's very important. I suppose the great accolade from your peers, peer recognition, is so important to us as academics. And I value peer recognition, and it's, you know, from an esteemed group. And it keeps getting you relevant. And maybe I got a few requests to write papers from other journals as a result of it. I'm sure I did. And also to contribute other things. And it gives you a little bit of social capital, I think, to have won it. And I was delighted to have won. I think it's the first time I won for HRDR. So I was thrilled to win it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Don't go away. Thank you very much. Okay.
I